Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday. That's the start of the weekend, and that's when a lot of booktubers make check-in type videos about the status of their reading. Friday reads, Saturday reads, weekend reads, to leave a record for themselves and also to let their viewers know what they've read recently and what they thought about it, what they're reading at the moment, and what they're going to read in the near future. I love watching those kinds of videos, so I try to remember to make those kinds of videos and give you just a bit of what I've been reading, a little bit about what I'm working on at the moment, and what I plan to read. So I've got a few books lined up here. And the first one is a bit of a reread. I've already read all of its separate parts, but I'm going to give it a little more concerted attention this weekend. It's by Joseph Connolly, and it's called The New Prepper's Survival Bible. And it differs from a lot of other prep books. This is doomsday prepping, basically, is what this book is. And it differs from some of the others in that it gives you many scenarios of what kind of doom you might be looking at. Is it full-scale nuclear war? Is it a massive pandemic, something much worse than COVID-19? Is it an EMP pulse that stops all electromagnetic technology from working? But at the heart of every one of those scenarios, I mean, there are little bits and pieces that you would tweak here and there to change your response depending on what the thing is. But in all of these situations, the thing is basically the severance of the social web that you live in and prepping for that. Now, some of it is very proactive, and the proactive stuff is where these books tend to go off the rails into crackpottery. If there's an end of the world type scenario where people have gone feral and are attacking each other and turning into massive cannibal hordes and whatnot, you're not going to live through that. No one's going to live through that, and you wouldn't want to, even if you. There reaches a crackpot point in a lot of prepping books where you wonder, okay, but what are you trying to save here? What life are you actually trying to save here? What is your life going to be like if you're right and all of your neighbors are wrong when all of this happens? And it's universally a horrible life, something almost in a way worse than simply dying in whatever the disaster is. So you want to take those end goal extrapolations with a grain of salt. But what I find interesting about books like this, and this one is particularly good along those lines, very full of information, very full of it, is the premise. Because the premise is not crackpot. You are, almost certainly, if you're listening to this video, you are overwhelmingly dependent on an infrastructure that isn't as secure as you think it is. So it would pay, definitely. I'm not talking here about you making it to the exiled military bunker before the hordes of the zombie apocalypse do. But I'm talking about an interim, a stopgap period of survival until order is restored. If order is not going to be restored, no one is going to live, and you wouldn't want to anyway. You wouldn't want to be the king of that pile. So the dream that animates all prepping literature that I've ever read is a horrible one that shouldn't animate that literature. It should be something you want to avoid. But short of the zombie apocalypse, it's a question that I've raised many times on this channel in the past. If the water stopped flowing out of your faucets right now, what would you do? I think for most people, they would say, well, there's probably a break in the line somewhere. I'm sure that a crew is working on it, and you would go to bed. And if you woke up in the morning and the water still wasn't coming out of your faucets and there was no water in the stores because it had been hoard bought by a whole bunch of people who didn't go to bed, what would you do? A very simple question, and not at all an outlandish scenario. What would you do? Same thing with food. People often think, well, I've been through the end of the world, a doomsday scenario with COVID, but you ordered food that was delivered to your doorstep by a masked deliverer, and then you took the food in and you wiped down the bags and you wiped down the food and you cooked it to a fare thee well. We're talking about a scenario in which that isn't true, in which there's no food in the stores, there are no stores, and there's no delivery of any kind, where all of the web around you has stopped supporting you and you're on your own. Well, what would you do? For you, for your pets, for your meds, what would you do? And the heart of the basic part of prepping, not the crazy parts, not the I'll be the one in the bunker parts, but the heart of the basic parts of these is just to take precautions against that. You don't have to be insane. You don't have to be a crackpot to take precautions against that. To have a pallet of drinkable water stored in your basement or in a closet somewhere. To have a big shelf in your pantry of non-perishable food items that you regularly rotate. So nothing goes out, nothing spoils, and you could live on it. You could live on that stuff. If there were no supplies of food, you could live on it. Do you have a first aid kit? Not a little tin box with Band-Aids in it, but an actual working first aid kit. Do you have one of those things, and do you know how to use everything that's in it? Do you have a really good quality knife? Do you have a transistor radio? Do you have some kind of tarp or protection system to make shelter if the shelter you're living in now goes away? Not forever, not until the zombie apocalypse is over, but just until order is restored. Do you have that? Because you should. There's nothing crazy about that. There is quite a bit crazy about this book. Not so much crazy as 13-year-old daydreaming, 13-year-old boy daydreaming. That element of 13-year-old boy daydreaming is in so many prepper books that I almost am blind to it, but it's annoying, it's embarrassing, it detracts from what is actually a serious subject. But I'll be giving this another read just to brush up on the differences between the apocalypses. Then this next one it's very enthusiastically written, very knowledgeable of its sources. It did not convince me at all. It's a reread. I'm going to reread it because the author seems like a decent guy and seems very, very much to believe what he's saying. I don't think he's just a grifter in the history world. It's Matthew Lewis, The Survival of the Princes in the Tower. And it's a book about the heirs of King Edward, who went into the Tower of London for their own protection when their father died and were never seen again. They didn't come out alive. And there's been a to-do about, what happened to the princes in the tower ever since. A to-do that was given the mother of all turbo boost by Josephine Tay in her novel, The Daughter of Time. I've never understood that turbo boost. I've never understood the romanticism behind this subject. If this were any of the other figures that I could name, a dozen different figures who had extremely similar trajectories, ended up in the tower, were never seen again, no one would think anything of it. It's this painting. It's these innocent, wide-eyed, ringlet-haired little boys that makes people think, well, no, history can't be that cruel. History can be that cruel. The fate of the princes in the tower, I think, could not be any more obvious. Richard, their uncle, had them killed so that he could be King of England. I think there's more than ample evidence to that effect. But Lewis thinks not. He wants to argue. I am sure that he got this argument, that he was inspired with this originally by Josephine Tay, as everyone was in the modern era. I thought this was really sincere, very energetic, but total just wish extrapolation on almost every page. Common sense, apart from the discovery of skeletons, common sense tells you what happened to these two. You don't need more than that, unless the historical record objects to that common sense, and it doesn't. So I'm going to give it another try, though. It's a major work on the subject. Then this next one, I have been reading Alistair MacLean. I've been rereading Alistair MacLean. I haven't yet reread any of the big books of his that were really popular because they were made into movies. But I have been rereading him, and I've been a bit surprised at how much I've been enjoying it. He is terrific. I've been really enjoying it. So I read another one of his books, and this week, and did not remember any of it. So I think I'm not just rereading Alistair MacLean. I think I'm reading Alistair MacLean as well. I think there's quite a bit that he wrote that I have not read. And this time around, it was The Lonely Sea, which is a collection of short stories set in World War II. And I love them. I don't think it had a weak story. And I do not remember these at all. So I am assuming that I never read this. I'm trying to call up in my mind what any paperback would have looked like. But none of these stories struck me as familiar at all. And some of them would, if I had ever read them before. So I'm just going to continue with Alistair MacLean. He wrote a whole bunch of books. He appears to be an author that I really get along with. Then we have something that I'm pretty sure I found from one of those daily ebook deal websites that I signed up for. This is by Tess Rini, and it is My Secret Positano. And that town stacked up on the hill there is the Italian town of Positano. This is about a young woman who ends up in Positano and falls in love with a brooding, handsome man who turns out to be a squintillionaire. And all of that is very contrived, and yet I love this. I thought it was light and sweet. Also, at a couple of points, genuinely funny. Contemporary romance novels like this tend to try for funny and fall well short of it. But this one, there were a couple of scenes, a couple of lines that landed. There's never any doubt that the male main character and the female main character are made for each other. There's never any doubt in their minds. I found it just a nice, sunny read. Then this next one is a rare example of me skipping ahead. Usually I don't like to read the next year's books, any of them, in the current year. And every year, although I don't like that, every year there are a couple of things that form exceptions. There haven't been many exceptions this year. But this one I thought, well, you don't have to read the whole thing, but you should definitely dip your toe in and start getting the feel for it so that you'll be prepared when it actually does appear next year, because it's a major thing. It's a new translation of the Shahnameh by Ferdowsi. The translation here is by Ahmad Sadri. And I dipped into this originally thinking, well, I'll do the introduction, I'll do the foreword, I'll do any kind of translator's preface, maybe I'll look at some notes, maybe I'll read a couple of the stories just to see how this author does it, how he compares to, for instance, the Penguin Classic. Maybe I'll pull down the Penguin Classic and get reacquainted with that, read the introduction to that, all the stuff that you need to do an intelligent review of something like this. But I got caught up in it. So this is coming out next year, a new translation of the Shahnameh that I'm assuming that it will be widely reviewed. And it's got a lot of meat on its bones. It's some very interesting choices, even right away I noticed some of the differences between it and, for instance, the Penguin Classic translation, since I can't read the original. Then this next one is a reread. I thought it was impressive when I first read it. I think I reviewed it. I had my reservations about it, and I went to it again. I went back to Protestants by Alec Ryrie, a history of Protestantism and its broader effects both on Catholicism and on the world in general. It's very good. It's very knowledgeable. It's very well written. There was an element to it when I read it the first time that bugged me. I don't think it bugged me enough even for me to mention it in my review. But I was prepared for it this time around. There's an element of smugness in this book. A kind of sotto voce smugness, a kind of smug, behind-the-hand sneering at the Enlightenment that I think is so subtle that the author might not even be aware of it. But it's definitely there. It runs throughout the book. And that, the first time I read it, that bugged me. And I was ready for it the second time. It's still there. It still bugged me. Because I know where it comes from. I know that smugness, all in books like this, it only ever comes from one place. And that place is Narnia. Your smugness about how, well, Protestants might fight amongst themselves and they might fight with Catholics, but hey, at least they're not atheists. Show me your goblins. that smugness comes from you just assuming on a bedrock level, way below the level of thought, that you are writing about something real here. Well, the wars, the killing, sure, that's real. But the thing that this is all about, the invisible goblins that this is all about, don't exist. Neither you nor anybody alive nor anybody who's ever lived has ever been able to do anything about that. And yet the smugness is always there. So that attitude has been present. And I've read a couple of books by this author. I've been impressed by both of them. And I was impressed by this, reading it all over again. Definitely worth the reread. It's just a little bit annoying. That's all. You don't get to be smug on the subject until you can introduce me to the source of your smugness, and you can't, because the source of your smugness does not exist. You think that would inculcate just a tiny bit of humility, but anyway, asking humility from a scholar is probably a bad idea. Then we'll move on to work in translation. This is the slight little thing. We've seen it on this channel. This is the Vita Nuova. This translation is by Joseph Luzzi. I read this. It isn't long at all. It's tiny. I read this and I reread it and I reread it. I went back and read the earlier translation by David Slavitt. This came out in 2010. So they're very similar. They're very similar things, very tiny little things. I went and reread a few other translations, and I guess this would be one of the works, small as it is, this would be one of the works that I guess I'm still working on. I'm not currently still working on the Shahnameh. I gave myself a real good taste of what that new translation is going to be like, and I will really bear down on it once it appears. But this I am working on. I'm working on understanding the choices that the translator is making here, because this is a deceptively complicated work. On the surface, it doesn't seem it, but it is. So I guess you could say I'm still working on that. Then this next one is not actually a follow-up to the Prepper's Bible. This is a completely different thing. This is Patrick Hutchinson, and it's his book Cabin, Off-the-Grid Adventures with a Clueless Craftsman. That off-the-grid part might seem to connect it to the Prepper's Bible, but this is really an expansion of an article that the author did for Outside Magazine about the misadventure. He's not a handyman. He is not an outdoorsman. He is not a pipe layer or an electrician or anything like that, but he wants to build a house that sits on its own foundation, doesn't have any neighbors, draws its own water, has its own food larder and whatnot. In that sense, is off the grid. I mean, of course, being off the grid is the holy grail for all preppers, because they view the grid as evil, except when they're playing PS4. But this is not that. This book is not born from that kind of fervid paranoia. And I have not read it. I read the Genesis article, but I haven't read the book, so I'm assuming it will be completely charming. Then we have something, a comic book, an epic collection. Marvel Comics does a series of full-color comic book reprints, big paperback volumes, really, really good. You pay for them. You pay almost $50 for them, but you get your money's worth. In issues and extras, you get your money's worth. And they're a volume that I don't know if this is new or a reprint, but this is God Loves, Man Kills, a new epic collection of the X-Men. With almost all the writing in here is by Chris Claremont. There's a great deal of artwork by the cover artist here, Paul Smith. I was in the drastic minority when these issues were coming out. And I imagine it's still a minority, although all the people, it's been decades and decades. I was in the drastic minority of not particularly liking Paul Smith's artwork. I think it's overly fussy and a little static, and everybody is flat. He doesn't know how to draw a three-dimensional person, and everybody is tiny and skinny and delicate in a way that it might work with Jean Grey. It doesn't really work with Colossus. And so this thing is going to have a lot of Paul Smith artwork. I get the cover says Claremont, Smith, Anderson, and Miller. So maybe I'm remembering the time frame of these issues wrong. I would have thought that John Romita Jr. did a bunch of artwork for the issues reprinted here. But I guess maybe not. The Anderson involved there is the artist for the title graphic novel, God Loves, Man Kills, which is included in here. That's reprinted 1,000,000 times, and I have the original. A much honored X-Men story about bigotry and how mutants are thought of. That is in this volume, and that's intriguing. It's always interesting to read God Loves, Man Kills one more time. But the main thing of interest to me here in this volume is the reason why Frank Miller's name is on the cover here. Frank Miller did a 4-issue miniseries of Wolverine that is really good. It's startlingly visually good. And I don't remember the last time they reprinted it. It's in here. All 4 issues are in this volume. That alone is worth getting this volume. I used to have those 4 individual issues, and I used to have a little collection that Marvel Comics did. I don't have them anymore. I don't have those issues in any way, and haven't read them in quite some time. So this will have enough in it to justify the $45 or $50 price tag. Then we have something that I should have gotten to by now. It's a memoir by Ramachandra Guha, and I love his books. This is The Cooking of Books. Basically, the story of a correspondence between him and an editor. Right up my alley in terms of both the subject matter and the writer of half the letters. So I don't know why I haven't got to this, but this is definitely on the horizon. Then we have a biography of Elizabeth of York by Beverly Adams. This is going to dovetail, obviously, with The Princess in the Tower. And I don't know what will be in here that I don't already know. So I probably won't go at it from that point of view. I'll probably go at it just for how good a job the author does in telling the story, and maybe original speculation or whatnot. All of that stuff will be fascinating. I think I know everything about Elizabeth of York, but we'll see what the author does with it. Then we have a little bit of an oddity. This is, I admit, more extracurricular curiosity than what I will find on the page. I think I know what I will find on the page. The book is called The Muscle Ladder by Jeff Nippard, who is a YouTube bodybuilder. He certainly did not write this book. I'm sure that there's no actual author listed on the cover, but I'm sure that whoever he paid to write this will be acknowledged prominently and early in the book. But there won't be much in the way of prose anyway. This will be all about training methods. His training methods for bodybuilding. And none of that is really immediate interest to me because my bodybuilding days are over. But it'll be interesting for extracurricular reasons because Jeff Nippard is, he's an interesting figure. He's a nice guy. Everybody in the industry seems to like him. He's 5 feet tall in shoes. So he is almost a midget. And has a body that is, more importantly, more to the point, all natural, which in the YouTube weightlifting gym bro world, that is a huge fire line. Are you all natty? Are you a natural? Are you selling your weightlifting and fitness programs to thousands and thousands of hopeful 18-year-olds, telling them if you do this program, you can look like me? Well, are you lying when you do that, or are you telling the truth? If you are looking the way you do because you regularly inject steroids, well, that's not part of the program that you're selling, and that means that those teenage boys who are following your program and paying you could never achieve what they're seeing. If you're their visual goal, they're never going to reach it because you're leaving out the ingredient that made it possible. Which makes almost every fitness influencer on YouTube an obvious liar, an obvious fraud. They are selling you literally an impossible dream. And that is why whether or not you are all natty has been such a flashpoint, especially lately, when a supposed all natty weightlifter named Alex Eubank decided not only to take steroids, but to film it and make it look attractive to those teenage boys. Like I said in an earlier video this week, God only knows how many tens of thousands of young, impressionable teenage boys Alex Eubank alone, personally, is going to turn into lifelong drug addicts. God only knows. It'll be 10,000 if we're lucky. Whereas Jeff Nippard says that he has never done any enhancement of any kind, that everything he's done with his body has been natural. Now, either that's true and he's the last person, the last natural in the weightlifting world, or it's not true. And his revelation is going to come down the line. But either way, those kind of extracurricular interests will be the main reason that I page my way through this thing. And then this next one is by William Graves Hoyt. This is a reread, but it's a reread from so long ago that I'm sitting here thinking about, okay, what was that book like? I know that I read it. It's in my reading journal, but sitting here wondering what is this book like draws an almost complete blank. So this will be a lot like Alistair MacLean. If I read those Alistair MacLean short stories before, I completely forgot them, which is not usual for me. This is called Lowell and Mars. And it's about Percival Lowell, the astronomer who originally posited that perhaps Mars was inhabited by an alien civilization, judging by the canals and whatnot that he had seen through his telescope. And this is a biography of Lowell, and also a really good, if I remember correctly, a really good look at his science just in general. His publications, his discoveries, his correspondence with other scientists. But the substance of it, how good a job the author does, or how well the subject is handled, I don't remember any of that. So it could be that that when I think about this as a science biography of Lowell, I'm really remembering just the publicity material, and had never actually got around to reading the book. That would be weird. I find the Lowells, all of them, utterly fascinating. It would be weird if there were a major Lowell book that I didn't read, but I'm looking forward to going at this again and seeing, I imagine that in the first 10 pages I'll know whether or not I've ever read it. The penny will drop then. But I think the subject is fascinating. I think it's a terrible, terrible shame that there isn't a more recent big biography of Percival Lowell. And I think it's horrible that that some of his pioneering books, especially about civilization on Mars, are out of print. I think they're out of print, and they shouldn't be. They're tremendous reading. They are the seedbed for science fiction, the genre of science fiction. Even though, as science, they're wrong, technically wrong. But anyway, it's going to be fun to reread. So that is a Friday Reads for me. A whole bunch of the spectrum, stuff that I have read. I'm not going to reread it. Stuff that I'm rereading. Stuff that I'm returning to over and over again to get better and better acquainted with for the future. Brand new stuff, that just the usual mixture, and with the usual curiosity. I'm curious to know what you're working on, how your reading week has been, how your reading weekend is going to be. Do you have hopes for it? So feel free to leave a comment. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.